So in this video, we're talking about something called orchestration. Now, orchestration sometimes means just specifically arranging for instruments that are in an orchestra, like strings and horns and things like that. But more broadly, orchestration means how you choose and arrange the various instruments in your song. As in, are you going to use a guitar and a synth and a bass and drums, or are you going to use a piano and a flute and a saxophone, or whatever it happens to be? Even if you're going to use all synths, which synths are you going to use? Which synths blend well together? So orchestration is learning how to choose sounds that work well together for the specific purpose that you're using them. So there's a lot to talk about in this realm, but what's firstly most important to know is the human hearing range. We've touched on this briefly before, but this extends from 20 to 20,000 hertz. Now, if you recall, a hertz is a measurement we use for a speed of vibration, the frequency of some note. And this means like how many vibrations per second. So 20 hertz is 20 vibrations per second, up to 20,000. So 20 sounds super, super low, like it doesn't even sound like anything. It feels like something. It feels like an earthquake. 20,000 is the very peak of human hearing range. And as you get older, in fact, you start to lose some of those frequencies. I probably can't even hear 20,000 hertz anymore, but younger people can. So this is the broad range that we can essentially hear in on average. And all of our instruments are going to fit somewhere or everywhere across this frequency range. So it's important to know how to balance these instruments, because if we have 10 instruments and they're all focused at the top of the range, that's going to sound kind of weird. This is going to feel empty down here, and it's going to feel too crazy and busy up here. So learning to spread your instruments out across the frequency range is an important thing to come to know. A lot of people do it instinctively, but it's also possible to think about it and make conscious decisions about what instruments to use, what synths to use, because maybe I've used a sound that feels very dull and soft, and then it'd be nice to use something that feels sharp and bright to contrast it, so they'll be easily discerned. You can hear this one and you can hear this one. If everything you use is dull and soft, it's all going to blend together, which there's nothing wrong with that. You could do that too, if that's what the song calls for. It's just you want to know what you're doing, so you don't pick 10 instruments that are in the same frequency range without knowing it, and then your song ends up sounding really strange and you don't know why. So what I've got here is a little snippet of Twilight Waters. And we're going to use this as an example. So check this out. I'm going to take an EQ, which we're going to learn about in this octave, and I'm going to pin it. Now, I haven't talked about pinning yet, I don't think. Pinning is what allows you to have multiple plugin windows open simultaneously. So if I push this little pin up here, this thing is going to stay open even when I open another plugin, such as this one. I'm not going to talk about what this is exactly right now. What matters is the sound. So what's going to happen here is that, I'm going to turn this off for a sec. Let's just watch the graph here first of all. So this graph ranges from 20 hertz down here up to 20,000 hertz up here, the human hearing range. And the motion you're seeing is the energy at various frequencies. So if we look here, there's a lot of energy down here in the bass because of the kick drum is hitting on every beat, and there's a bass, synth bass hitting. Then all the high frequencies, all the middle frequencies. So this is like a visual depiction of what we're hearing. So you can see this song covers the whole frequency range right now because there's a lot of instruments playing in all different parts of the spectrum. So our goal here is to isolate parts of the spectrum just so we can listen to what that sounds like and also see it on this graph. So this plugin I've got here is going to isolate a certain section of the spectrum, and I'm going to sweep it around so we only hear the lows, only hear the middle, only hear the highs. Check it out. Let's start real low. So as you can hear, it sounds like you're almost hearing the song from another room. And look on the graph. No highs at all, only lows. This is what the low part of the musical spectrum sounds like. Now I'm going to slowly move this up. We start to introduce some middle frequencies, and the low ones start to get quieter. Now we're firmly in the middle. As you can see on the graph, there's a lot of energy in the middle, tiny bit in the high, much less in the low now. So this is what the middle of our hearing spectrum sort of sounds like, and it extends a little bit higher to this area. But now if I go to the very top, notice this is where all the very crispy high-end sounds are. So you hear like the hi-hat, no bass anymore, not even really a kick drum or anything, just the very, very high end. So different instruments live in different areas. So that's an example of how music spans our hearing spectrum, and we want to start to be attentive to these various frequency ranges, low, middle, and high, and then we can even get more detailed in that. The more experience we get, we can actually hear little sections within there, like the low mids, the mid mids, the high mids, the low highs, the mid highs, the high highs, and so on like that. So you can start to hear very nuanced and detailed parts of the frequency spectrum, and then you can make decisions about your mixing based on that, about what instruments you're going to use, which is what we're talking about now. So let's take a look at some instruments as they sound or as they look through this spectrum analyzer here. So I'm going to have this synth pad here, which sounds like this. And just take a look at how that looks and think about how it sounds. It sounds very soft. Dull, meaning no high frequencies. None of that. This is something that would fade into the background of your song. You almost wouldn't notice it's there if other instruments are playing at the same time, which can be a great thing. So now let's move on to this real sharp bass. Look at that. Covers the whole frequency spectrum. This would take up a lot of space in your mix, meaning if this instrument's playing, it's covering the whole spectrum already. It's gonna like be right in your face, and other instruments might have to fight against it for their own space because this covers everything. And you can hear it. Listen to how bright it sounds. All bright just meaning that high-end fizzy sound. If I remove some of that, now let's check out what a violin looks like. So it's mostly in the middle, but it does have some highs too. More highs than the synth pad had, but no lows. Let's go to guitar. It covers a pretty broad range, but changes over time. Notice that the highs are there right at the beginning, right here, but then they die out. Move this more in the middle. So that initial pluck is going to cut through the mix because it's got the high frequencies in it, and then it gets dull afterwards. And lastly, let's check out some drums. So here's a kick drum. Notice that it's got a lot of energy in the low part, and it starts to get less and less as it gets higher, but it does have some high because you can hear the click. Without that click, it would just be a like this. We can try that actually. Like that. Here's a snare. Lots of highs, but it's got a big spike down here too. Here's a hi-hat. Almost all highs with very little lows in it. So you start to get an idea of how different instruments cover the frequency spectrum. So if you had a soft pad playing, that would be your mids. If you had the cymbals on your drums playing, that would be your highs. Your kick drum and your bass would be your lows. Your melody would sit somewhere in the middle there. Balancing your instruments across this frequency spectrum is an interesting way to think, because if you put too many things in one place, you get an interesting phenomenon called masking, which means that you end up not being able to hear something because they're competing for space. When you put many instruments that are in the same frequency range playing simultaneously, you end up getting kind of this messy sound because they're all fighting to be heard and they don't have separate areas on the frequency spectrum to be in. So we're going to learn a lot about this when we start doing EQ. We're looking at an EQ right here. And we're going to learn about EQing in the next section, and then this is going to like change our world in terms of mixing and making our instruments sound different. For now, all that's required is to start thinking about how instruments sound. Do they have low frequencies or high frequencies? And do you want to balance that across your song? Does the section of your song you're playing, require it to sound soft? Then you want to have instruments that sound soft. Do you need that melody to cut through the mix so you can really hear it? Then that thing should probably have high frequencies in it because that's going to stick out against all the rest of the things in there. This just starts to occur as you pay attention to it more. You start to have ideas about it. One of the best ways to go is just to listen to professional music and analyze it as it's playing, thinking to yourself, what is the frequency spectrum like that I'm hearing? What elements have high frequencies? What elements have low frequencies? Do I like how that sounds? Does it change over time? Does the kick drum have a lot of lows or does it not? This kind of thing. When you start paying attention to how the frequencies are in a song or the instruments are in a song, you'll have a lot of insights about how to make your own songs and why certain songs sound good, why certain songs sound dull or bright or interesting. A lot of it comes from contrast. Having instruments that are soft, as in with no high frequencies, contrasted with instruments that are bright with lots of high frequencies is a very interesting thing and allows them to be very defined. You can hear this one clearly and you can hear this one clearly, and they're not competing for space. So having contrast between instruments sometimes is a great thing, and it's just something to start to consider. This kind of thing, talking about how an instrument sounds, meaning its tonal quality, what makes a violin sound different from a piano versus a human voice, the sound of every instrument is called its timbre. And timbre is just a word that just describes how something sounds, just the tonal characteristic of that instrument or of that sound or of that synthesizer or whatever. If you start thinking about timbre and how you blend certain timbres, you can pay attention to that in different kinds of music. You say, oh, they use a synth with the piano there, or they use a guitar with flutes or whatever. And you think about the timbre of the two things. Do they work well together or do they fight each other? Thinking in this way is very illuminating and can give you a lot of new ideas about what instruments to blend with each other. And something else that happens is you can start to layer instruments, meaning two instruments play the same part. So you have a melody, for instance, that's, say, a piano and a flute, or a synth and a guitar, or two different kinds of synths. If you layer two synths that have the same timbre, they're both bright and energetic sounding, it's not going to be that interesting. If you layer two synths that have different timbres, you're going to get a very interesting mix of that. And there's a lot of experimentation that you can do. Even when you're playing chords, you can layer things. You can have a piano layered with a synth, or an electric piano layered with a guitar, or whatever it is, and you might get the pluckiness of the guitar layered with the softness of the electric piano. So becoming familiar with instruments is a great thing to do, and you do this simply by listening to music, asking, what are those instruments I'm hearing? You also do this by experimenting with all the instruments that you can find inside Studio One, looking at what their names are, listening to what the timbre sounds like. So when it comes time to make your own song, you can make decisions about, I need that soft feel right now. That should be this instrument or that instrument. I need that melody to really stand out and I should layer it with this. All these kind of thoughts start to occur when you pay attention to timbre. So that's really what I wanted to get across here with orchestration. And in the next video, we're going to start talking about some more advanced bass lines. And then we're going to blend these two, choosing instruments, new bass lines, and we're going to start creating a new song out of this.